Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back to Boring History. Tonight, we're taking a journey into the past, down the dark streets of America's cities, where the first lanterns flickered, shadows ruled the night, and sometimes, ghosts walked among them. From Boston's haunted oil lamps to New York's ghostly gaslights, from Edison's glowing inventions to the eerie neon nights of Broadway, this is not just the story of street lighting. It's the story of light versus darkness, progress versus fear, and the spirits that never left. So turn off the lights, get comfortable, and let's begin. The dark streets of early America. In the earliest days of colonial America, nighttime was a world transformed. Streets were not merely dim, they were nearly impenetrable voids. The settlers who built the first towns and cities along the Atlantic seaboard carried with them both the hopes of a new land and the dangers of unfamiliar nights. By day, markets bustled with trade, children ran between wooden houses, and craftsmen shaped tools in barrels. But when the sun set, silence blanketed the towns. The dark was heavy, alive with uncertainty. People feared the night, not just for superstition, but for very practical reasons. Criminal activity, from petty theft to violent assault, thrived in the shadows. Fires, one of the greatest hazards of colonial towns with their wooden structures, often broke out unnoticed in the darkness until it was too late. And for those who needed to travel after sunset, doctors making their way to patients, sailors heading back to port, or laborers returning home, the lack of light meant danger with every step. Lighting was not simply about convenience. It was about survival. The European influence. Colonial America did not invent street lighting from scratch. The settlers brought with them knowledge of Europe, where by the 1600s, cities like Paris and London had begun experimenting with organized street lighting systems. Paris, famously, became known as La Ville Lumière, the City of Light, after officials ordered lanterns hung from buildings and posts throughout the city to combat crime. The colonists looked to these models, but implementing them in the New World was far from simple. Colonial towns lacked the wealth, the infrastructure, and often the political will to maintain such a system. Instead, the earliest American attempts were modest, practical, and experimental. Boston's early lantern laws, 1690s. Boston was among the first American cities to take action. By the late 1600s, it had grown from a small Puritan settlement into a thriving colonial hub with busy wharves, merchants, and taverns. But as prosperity grew, so too did crime and disorder. In 1697, Boston officials passed a law requiring householders along the main streets to hang out a lantern during dark evenings, particularly on nights when the moon did not shine. These lanterns were simple oil lamps, fueled by whale oil, with glass panes that protected the flame from wind. The law was unevenly enforced, and compliance was spotty. Some families hung lanterns dutifully, while others neglected the rule. Yet even these scattered lights represented a revolution, the first effort to push back against the darkness of the American night. New York's whale oil lamps, 1700s. New York, another bustling colonial port, soon followed. In 1697, inspired by similar needs as Boston, city leaders ordered that lanterns be placed on poles or hung at street corners. The lamps were fueled by whale oil, an abundant product thanks to the whaling industry that dominated New England. The lamps were not very bright. They gave off a faint, flickering glow, enough to mark a corner or illuminate a doorstep, but not nearly enough to make the streets feel truly safe. Maintenance was also a constant struggle. Lamps needed to be refilled, wicks trimmed, and glass panes cleaned. Often, lamps simply went dark for want of care. Still, New York's adoption of whale oil lamps marked the first true municipal lighting system in America. It represented not just individual responsibility but a communal commitment. The city itself was beginning to take charge of public illumination. Philadelphia's visionary leadership, 1750s, 1770s. If Boston lit the first spark and New York followed, Philadelphia fanned the flame. By the mid-1700s, Philadelphia was America's most modern and ambitious city. Its wide streets, orderly grid, and vibrant commerce made it a model of Enlightenment urban planning. And it was in Philadelphia that one of the most important figures in American history, Benjamin Franklin, took a personal interest in street lighting. Franklin, always a man of practical genius, noticed that traditional lamps wasted much of their oil and produced uneven light. In the 1750s, he proposed and popularized a new type of lamp, a four-sided glass lantern with flat panes and a vent at the top to allow smoke to escape. This design was not only brighter but also cleaner, reducing the buildup of soot. Philadelphia adopted Franklin's design widely, and soon the city was known for its well-lit streets. Franklin himself wrote that a few lamps lighted here and there in a city, which has been long dark, will be much noticed and greatly followed. He was right. Philadelphia's lighting became a model for other American towns. Social impact of early lighting. Street lighting did more than just push back the shadows. It reshaped urban life. Taverns stayed open later, knowing customers could walk home with at least some light. Merchants extended their hours. Churches and public halls held evening gatherings. The very rhythm of life in American cities began to shift. But lighting also carried symbolic weight. It was seen as a sign of civilization, progress, and safety. A well-lit street represented order. A dark one suggested neglect. For the colonial elite, lighting was as much about projecting authority as about helping ordinary people find their way. Limitations and challenges. Still, these early systems were far from perfect. The whale oil lamps gave off a smoky, unpleasant odor. They were expensive to maintain. In Boston and New York, the responsibility often fell on underpaid lamplighters, who trudged through the streets with ladders and oil cans. On windy nights, flames blew out, leaving stretches of darkness. On rainy nights, lamps sputtered and failed. Moreover, lighting was concentrated only on main streets and marketplaces. Residential alleys and poorer districts remained in shadow. This unevenness created a divide. Some areas were bright and secure, while others remained dangerous after dark. Lighting and revolution. By the time of the American Revolution in the 1770s, street lighting had become a familiar part of life in major cities. Lanterns glowed along Boston's harbor streets, New York's wharves, and Philadelphia's broad avenues. Soldiers marched beneath their dim light, rebels whispered in the shadows, and pamphleteers hurried to spread their ideas by night. Lighting, however faint, gave Americans a sense that their cities were modern, connected to the wider world, and ready to stand on equal footing with Europe. The revolution was fought in daylight and darkness alike, and in many ways, the flicker of those oil lamps symbolized the young nation's first steps toward progress. The dawn of a new era. By the early 19th century, American cities were restless. Whale oil lamps, once revolutionary, had become a burden. They were too dim, too smelly, too expensive, and too unreliable. Cities were growing rapidly, immigrants poured in, industries rose, and commerce flourished. The nighttime city needed more than flickering lamps. Enter gaslight. Invented in Britain and popularized in London by the early 1800s, coal-based gas lighting promised a brighter, steadier, and more expansive source of illumination. Gas was created by heating coal in special furnaces and channeling the resulting vapor through pipes into lamps. Unlike oil, gas did not need daily refilling. Instead, a network of pipes could feed entire neighborhoods. For Americans, gaslight was more than just technology. It was a symbol of modernity, a sign that their young cities could rival the great capitals of Europe. Baltimore, America's first gaslit city. In 1816, Baltimore made history as the first American city to adopt gas street lighting. The idea was spearheaded by a German immigrant, Rembrandt Peale, who demonstrated the technology in his museum. Curious crowds gathered as Peale lit up a large room with dozens of gas lamps. The effect was dazzling, steady flames glowing with a brilliance people had never seen indoors. The demonstration convinced investors and city leaders. That same year, the Baltimore Gaslight Company was formed, and by 1817, the first gas street lamps flickered to life. Baltimore's main streets glowed with a new radiance, and the city instantly gained a reputation as progressive and forward-thinking. Expansion to other cities. Baltimore's success spread quickly. New York, Boston, and Philadelphia soon followed. By the 1820s and 1830s, major cities across the eastern seaboard were installing gasworks, large industrial plants where coal was converted into gas and pumped through underground mains. Each new gaslight system required massive investment. Cities had to dig up streets, lay iron pipes, and construct central gas plants. It was disruptive, costly, and controversial. But the payoff was immense. Entire districts could be illuminated with the flip of a valve. The role of the lamplighter. Even with gas, the figure of the lamplighter remained central. These men, and sometimes boys, walked the streets with long poles, turning valves and igniting lamps each evening, then extinguishing them at dawn. They became beloved symbols of the city, part of the urban rhythm, often romanticized in poems and songs. Children would wait to see the lamplighter pass, and many neighborhoods viewed him as both a guardian of the night and a reminder that order and light could triumph over darkness. Gaslight and urban transformation. The impact of gaslight on American cities was profound. Commerce extended, shops stayed open later, theaters flourished, and restaurants attracted evening crowds. City nightlife, once limited, began to blossom. Public safety improved, crime, though not eliminated, was reduced in well-lit areas. Citizens felt safer walking at night. Cultural life expanded, music halls, social clubs, and public lectures thrived in the glow of gaslight. For the first time, American cities developed a true night culture. Class divide highlighted, wealthier districts enjoyed brilliant light, while poorer neighborhoods often remained in shadow. Light became a visible marker of privilege. Criticism and hazards. Not everyone welcomed gaslight. Critics complained about the pollution caused by coal gas plants, whose smoke and fumes often fouled the air. Explosions were a real danger. Leaks in underground pipes sometimes led to fires or blasts. And while gaslight was brighter than oil lamps, it still had a yellowish hue that left shadows lurking in alleyways. Some religious leaders even condemned gaslight, claiming it encouraged vice by enabling late-night revelry. Darkness, they argued, was God's curfew. New York's glittering Broadway. Perhaps nowhere was the transformation more visible than in New York City. By the 1840s, Broadway, already the city's most famous thoroughfare, was lined with rows of gas lamps. At night, it glowed like a ribbon of fire. Visitors described it with awe, comparing it to the boulevards of Paris. Gaslight turned Broadway into America's first true Great White Way, a precursor to the neon and electric brilliance that would define Times Square decades later. Philadelphia and Boston. Philadelphia, always eager to embrace innovation, became one of the best-lit cities of the mid-19th century. Its wide streets were ideal for gas lamps, and officials prided themselves on creating a safe, orderly nighttime environment. Boston too expanded rapidly, especially around its bustling port and commercial districts. Gaslight became a point of civic pride, with residents boasting that their city was as advanced as London. The Gaslight era and social change. Gaslight altered not just how cities looked but how people behaved. Working hours lengthened. Social classes mingled in theaters and taverns after dark. Courtships flourished in the glow of evening promenades. At the same time, the extension of nighttime activity created new anxieties. Police forces had to expand. Moral debates erupted about gambling halls, dance clubs, and late-night drinking. Light gave freedom, but freedom also brought temptation. The beginning of the end. By the late 19th century, gaslight was everywhere. From grand avenues to small towns, Americans had grown accustomed to the steady glow. Yet a new force was emerging that would soon eclipse gaslight entirely: electricity. In 1879, Thomas Edison perfected his incandescent light bulb. Just a few years later, arc lamps, early, dazzlingly bright electric lights, were being tested in city streets. Gaslight, once cutting-edge, suddenly seemed old-fashioned. Part 3, The Electric Age, Arc Lamps and Edison's Bulb, 1870s, 1900s. The cracks in the gaslight era. By the mid-19th century, gaslight had become standard across American cities. Streets glowed with the familiar yellowish haze, and lamplighters moved through neighborhoods each evening like clockwork. Yet, for all its progress, gaslight was still flawed. It was costly, required constant infrastructure, produced pollution, and its glow, though brighter than whale oil, still left many streets dim. At the same time, America was changing. Factories ran longer hours, cities sprawled outward, and industrial growth demanded brighter, more reliable illumination. The stage was set for a revolution. The birth of electric lighting. Electric lighting had been a dream of inventors since the early 1800s. Arc lamps, which created light by sparking electricity between carbon electrodes, had been demonstrated in Europe and America as early as the 1810s. They were incredibly bright, so bright that people often described them as artificial suns. But they were also noisy, difficult to maintain, and prone to flickering. By the 1870s, however, technology had advanced enough that arc lamps could be used in public spaces. The race to electrify American streets had begun. Cleveland, 1879, the first electrified city. The honor of being the first city to install electric street lighting belongs to Cleveland, Ohio. On April 29, 1879, the city lit up its public square with a dozen arc lamps designed by Charles F. Brush, a Cleveland-born inventor. The effect was stunning. Thousands of people gathered to watch as night suddenly turned to day. The lamps were mounted high on poles, casting brilliant light that outshone any gas lamp. Cleveland newspapers hailed it as a miracle, and the event marked the true beginning of electric street lighting in America. The spread of arc lamps. After Cleveland's success, arc lamps spread rapidly. Cities like New York, San Francisco, and Chicago experimented with installing them in central squares, parks, and major avenues. Arc lamps were especially popular in industrial districts, where their intensity was useful for safety. Factories, docks, and rail yards glowed at night, allowing work to continue around the clock. This was a double-edged sword. While it boosted productivity, it also reinforced harsh labor conditions, keeping workers toiling long into the night. Towers of light. Some cities experimented with moonlight towers, enormous iron towers equipped with clusters of arc lamps, designed to flood entire districts with light. Austin, Texas, famously erected dozens of these towers in the 1890s, some of which still stand today as historic relics. The idea was ambitious. Instead of placing lamps on every corner, cities could install tall towers to illuminate everything at once. While impressive, the towers often left uneven pools of light, with dazzling brightness near the base and deep shadows beyond. Still, they became iconic symbols of America's first experiments in electrification. Edison and the incandescent bulb. If arc lamps were powerful but impractical, Thomas Edison's incandescent bulb offered something more refined. In 1879, Edison patented a bulb that produced steady, gentle light by heating a carbon filament inside a glass vacuum. Unlike the harsh glare of arc lamps, incandescent bulbs gave off a warm glow that resembled gaslight, but with greater consistency and safety. Edison's invention quickly became the foundation for entire lighting systems. He envisioned not just bulbs, but complete electrical grids, power stations, wiring, and switches that could deliver electricity to homes, businesses, and streets. Pearl Street Station, New York, 1882. Edison's dream became reality on September 4, 1882, when he opened the Pearl Street Station in Lower Manhattan. It was the first central power plant in the United States, supplying electricity to over 400 lamps in offices and shops within a small district. For the first time, American streets glowed with incandescent light. Shopkeepers marveled at the clean, steady illumination. Crowds gathered to see the lamps in action, astonished that wires running beneath the streets could bring such brilliance. Rivalry: Edison versus Westinghouse. Edison's system used direct current, DC, but other inventors, most notably George Westinghouse and Nikola Tesla, championed alternating current, AC, which could transmit electricity over longer distances. The so-called War of Currents played out not just in laboratories but in city streets. Some cities adopted Edison's DC systems, others chose Westinghouse's AC. The competition fueled rapid expansion of electric infrastructure, and by the late 1880s, electric streetlights were appearing across the nation. Chicago's electrification. Chicago, the booming industrial metropolis of the Midwest, embraced electric lighting with zeal. By the 1880s, the city was dotted with arc lamps and incandescent bulbs, particularly along State Street and Michigan Avenue. The World's Columbian Exposition of 1893 cemented Chicago's role as a leader in electrification. The fairgrounds were lit with thousands of incandescent lamps, dazzling visitors from around the globe. It was a spectacle so magnificent that people called it the White City, a vision of a future where electricity would transform every corner of urban life. The Electric City at night. By the turn of the 20th century, electric light was no longer an experiment, it was the new standard. Gaslight, once a marvel, now seemed quaint. Arc lamps blazed in public squares, incandescent bulbs lined city streets, and power companies expanded their networks to meet the insatiable demand. The night itself was being redefined. For the first time in history, large cities could be as lively at midnight as they were at noon. Streetcars ran late, department stores gleamed after dark, and theaters flourished under electric marquees. Electric light promised not just safety, but glamour. The city at night became a place of entertainment, spectacle, and modern identity. Social and cultural impact. The spread of electric lighting had profound effects. Crime and safety. Bright electric light deterred crime more effectively than gaslight, though criminals adapted to shadows and alleys. Urban expansion. Suburbs and new districts grew as electric grids extended outward, making night travel safer. Leisure culture. Cafes, vaudeville theaters, and amusement parks thrived, catering to nighttime crowds. Class symbolism. Once again, wealthier areas were lit first. Poorer districts lagged behind, their streets dark even as downtown glittered. The decline of gaslight. By 1900, gaslight was in retreat. Some neighborhoods still clung to it, especially where infrastructure was slow to develop. But electric companies, backed by investors and city officials, pushed hard to replace old systems. For lamplighters, the transition was bittersweet. Their profession, once essential, was fading into history. By the early 20th century, most lamplighters had disappeared from American streets, replaced by switchboards and power stations. Part 4, The Golden Glow, Neon, Broadway, and the Electrified Night, 1900s, 1930s. The Triumph of Electricity. By 1900, electric lighting was no longer a novelty, it was the future. Gas lamps still flickered in some small towns, but in major American cities, electricity ruled. From street corners to grand boulevards, the steady brilliance of incandescent bulbs transformed the nighttime cityscape. Electricity didn't just replace gaslight, it reshaped the very idea of the city. For the first time, a metropolis could project itself into the night, dazzling its citizens and visitors with a spectacle of light. The rise of the Great White Ways. Broadway in New York became the most famous example. By the early 1900s, it was lined with theaters, each eager to outshine its competitors. Marquees glittered with rows of incandescent bulbs, advertising plays, operas, and vaudeville shows. So brilliant was the display that people began calling it the Great White Way. Travelers from across the country came to see Broadway at night, marveling at the electric wonderland. Soon, other cities copied the idea. Chicago, San Francisco, and Los Angeles each developed their own light-filled districts, glowing beacons of urban pride. Street lighting as civic identity. City officials began to see lighting as more than utility, it was identity. To be a modern city meant to be a bright city. Municipal governments invested heavily in new lighting grids, transforming public squares, parks, and boulevards into showcases of electric brilliance. World fairs played a huge role in this trend. The 1904 St. Louis World's Fair and the 1915 Panama Pacific International Exposition in San Francisco used electric lighting to dazzle crowds. These fairs turned illumination into theater, convincing Americans that light was not only practical but also magical. Safety, order, and expansion. Street lighting in this era was strongly tied to urban planning. Reformers saw light as a way to reduce crime, improve traffic safety, and impose order on chaotic cities. Police departments reported fewer crimes in brightly lit areas. Traffic officials noted that electric lamps reduced accidents as automobiles became more common. Engineers experimented with lamp height, spacing, and brightness, gradually developing the modern science of illumination. The arrival of neon. If incandescent lamps gave cities a warm glow, neon gave them color and life. Invented in France in 1910, neon lighting reached American cities in the 1920s. Its vivid reds, blues, and greens revolutionized signage. The first American neon sign appeared in Los Angeles in 1923, advertising a Packard car dealership. Crowds were stunned by the glowing letters, which seemed to float in the night. Soon, neon spread everywhere: bars, diners, theaters, and storefronts. Neon made the city speak. A walk through downtown Los Angeles, Chicago, or New York in the 1930s meant passing under a forest of glowing signs, each competing for attention with brilliant, almost hypnotic light. Amusement parks and the electric dream. Street lighting also transformed leisure. Coney Island in New York became famous for its electric wonderlands. Luna Park and Dreamland, two of its great amusement parks, were covered in thousands of incandescent bulbs, outlining towers, rides, and roller coasters. Visitors described the parks as fairylands, places where night became day and reality gave way to fantasy. The parks symbolized electricity's power not just to illuminate but to enchant. The impact on nightlife. With streets illuminated, nightlife flourished as never before. Jazz clubs, speakeasies, and dance halls thrived in the 1920s, their neon signs beckoning patrons late into the night. Cities were alive after dark in ways unimaginable a century earlier. This new nightlife also reflected changing social norms. Women, who had once been discouraged from venturing out after sunset, increasingly joined the nighttime crowd. Couples strolled beneath neon signs. Workers celebrated their wages in bars and cabarets. Street lighting was not just a convenience, it was a cultural revolution. The challenges of early electric lighting. Despite the triumphs, the system was not perfect. Early incandescent bulbs were fragile and often burned out quickly. Power outages left entire districts in sudden darkness. Electricity was expensive, and poorer neighborhoods were sometimes left dim. Moreover, the obsession with brightness created debates. Was the city too bright? Did artificial light disturb sleep and disrupt natural rhythms? Doctors warned of light fatigue, while some philosophers worried that cities were losing their connection to natural light. Still, the enthusiasm was unstoppable. For most Americans, electric light symbolized progress, safety, and the thrill of modern life. Street lighting in the age of automobiles. The 1920s and 1930s also brought a new challenge, the automobile. Cars demanded brighter, more standardized street lighting to prevent accidents. Engineers began experimenting with reflector lamps, higher poles, and directional beams designed to illuminate roadways more evenly. By the 1930s, automobile lighting standards were being adopted, pushing cities to redesign their systems. The era marked the first time that traffic safety, not just general illumination, shaped the development of street lights. Depression-era lighting. Even during the hardships of the Great Depression, cities kept investing in street lighting. New Deal programs funded infrastructure projects, including lamp installations. For struggling Americans, light became a symbol of hope and resilience. In this way, street lighting carried not just practical value but also emotional meaning. It reassured people that the city, and the nation, still had a future, glowing even in the darkest times. Part 5, Streamlined Modernity, the 1930s to the 1950s. Standardizing the American night. By the 1930s, American cities had entered a new phase of development. The chaos of early electrification, arc lamps blazing here, incandescent bulbs glowing there, neon buzzing above, was giving way to order. City planners and engineers sought uniformity. Street lighting was no longer a patchwork of local experiments, it was becoming a system. Engineers began to calculate the exact spacing of lamps, the ideal height of poles, and the intensity of light required for different environments, residential, commercial, and industrial. This was the beginning of modern illumination engineering. The automobile shapes the night. One of the greatest forces driving standardization was the automobile. By the 1930s, cars had become common across America, and streets designed for horses and carriages were now crowded with headlights, horns, and engines. City officials recognized that poorly lit roads led to deadly accidents. A single burnt-out bulb could mean disaster on a busy intersection. As a result, cities invested heavily in roadway lighting, introducing brighter lamps and reflective materials designed specifically for traffic safety. The very look of American streets changed, poles grew taller, lamps were angled to cast beams directly onto roadways, and intersections became carefully illuminated. The advent of mercury vapor lamps. In the 1930s, a new technology appeared, the mercury vapor lamp. Unlike incandescent bulbs, which used heated filaments, mercury vapor lamps created light by exciting mercury gas inside a tube. The result was a bluish-white glow, far more efficient and longer-lasting than incandescent lamps. Though some found the color harsh, engineers praised the efficiency. By the late 1930s and 1940s, mercury vapor lamps began replacing older bulbs in major cities, especially along highways and industrial zones where longevity mattered most. Fluorescent lighting experiments. Around the same time, fluorescent lighting was being introduced. Fluorescent lamps, which used phosphor coatings to convert ultraviolet light into visible light, produced a steady, diffuse illumination. Though they became more common indoors, some cities experimented with fluorescent street lamps in the late 1930s and 1940s. The experiments were mixed. Fluorescent light was efficient, but the technology was fragile for outdoor use. Still, it hinted at a future where streets might glow in softer, more uniform tones. World War II and the blackout nights. The 1940s brought a dramatic interruption to America's relationship with light. World War II. For the first time since electrification, cities were forced to darken their nights. On the West Coast, fears of Japanese air raids led to strict blackout regulations. Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Seattle ordered residents to draw curtains, switch off signs, and dim streetlights. Coastal highways went dark to hide from submarines lurking offshore. The famous Battle of Los Angeles in 1942, when anti-aircraft guns fired into the night sky during a false alarm, unfolded under dimmed streetlights. Citizens who had grown accustomed to glowing nights suddenly found themselves in eerie shadow, reminded that light was not just progress but also vulnerability. On the East Coast, New York and Washington, D.C., also dimmed lights, though less dramatically. Street lighting, once a symbol of pride, became a potential target marker for enemy planes. Post-war boom and the return of brightness. When the war ended in 1945, Americans were eager to bring back the lights. Cities that had dimmed their lamps burst once more into brightness. Neon signs blazed again, theaters reopened, and boulevards glowed with new vigor. But now, the world had changed. Post-war America was richer, more technologically advanced, and ready for suburban expansion. Lighting had to keep up. Suburbia and the spread of street lamps. The 1950s saw an explosion of suburban development. Highways, cul-de-sacs, and residential tracts spread outward from cities. With them came new demands for lighting. Unlike older, crowded cities, suburbs required carefully planned systems. Lighting engineers designed uniform poles for residential streets, softer lamps for neighborhoods, and brighter lamps for arterial roads. The result was a new kind of nightscape, less dazzling than Broadway, but orderly, predictable, and safe for cars and families. Aesthetic shifts. Street lighting in the 1930s, 1950s also reflected cultural changes. Cities embraced streamlined, modern designs. Poles were simplified, lamps encased in sleek, rounded housings. The ornate iron posts of the Gaslight era gave way to functional steel and aluminum. This reflected broader trends in architecture and design: Art Deco in the 1930s, post-war modernism in the 1940s and 1950s. Light poles were no longer decorative objects, they were part of the invisible infrastructure of the modern city. The glow of America. By the 1950s, the American night had a new look. Downtown sparkled with neon, department store windows glowing late into the evening. Highways stretched outward, lined with mercury vapor lamps that cast pale light over endless asphalt. Suburbs glowed with orderly rows of smaller lamps, creating safety and comfort for post-war families. For the first time, nearly every American could expect light outside their home. Darkness had not vanished, alleys, rural roads, and neglected districts still lay in shadow, but the triumph of street lighting was nearly complete. Part 6, The High-Intensity Age, Sodium Lamps, Highways, and Urban Renewal, 1960s, 1980s. A nation on the move. By the 1960s, America was living in motion. Cars defined the culture, suburbs stretched endlessly outward, and the interstate highway system stitched the country together. The demand for better, brighter, more efficient lighting was greater than ever. This era was not just about illumination, it was about scale. Never before had so many roads, parking lots, shopping centers, and neighborhoods needed light at once. Street lighting became a mass infrastructure project, every bit as essential as highways and power lines. The sodium vapor revolution. The most defining technology of this period was the high-pressure sodium (HPS) lamp. Introduced in the 1960s and widely adopted through the 1970s and 1980s, HPS lamps produced a distinct orange-yellow glow. Why did cities embrace them? Efficiency. Sodium lamps used far less electricity than mercury vapor lamps, lasted longer, and produced more lumens per watt. For cash-strapped municipalities, they were a financial miracle. By the mid-1970s, entire cities were switching over. Highways glowed amber, downtowns pulsed under the sodium haze, and suburbs were bathed in warm orange light. The look of the American night. For anyone who lived through the late 20th century, sodium light became the color of memory. Photographs, movies, and personal recollections all share that same amber tint, street corners glowing softly, highways stretching under endless orange lamps, parking lots buzzing with sodium haze. This was the era when nighttime America developed a uniform aesthetic. Whether you stood in Detroit, Los Angeles, Dallas, or Boston, the glow was the same, a sodium-painted nightscape, efficient but strangely dreamlike. Urban renewal and street light expansion. The 1960s and 1970s were also decades of massive urban renewal. Cities demolished old neighborhoods, built high-rise housing projects, and constructed new highways through urban cores. Street lighting played a role in these transformations. New public housing complexes were often lined with sodium lamps to improve safety. Expressways carved through cities glowed under tall, high-mast poles designed to flood entire roadways. Parks, plazas, and civic centers received modern lighting grids to signal progress and order. Yet the results were mixed. Bright lights did not always bring safety. In some neighborhoods, harsh illumination only highlighted social inequality. Public housing projects often remained unsafe despite their floodlit courtyards. Critics began to question whether more light always meant less crime. Lighting the suburbs in the strip mall age. As Americans left urban cores for sprawling suburbs, the need for parking lot lighting exploded. Shopping malls, supermarkets, and drive-in theaters all required massive installations. Developers installed rows of tall sodium vapor poles, creating vast seas of amber light. The result was both practical and surreal. For many, the suburban night was no longer about dimly lit porches or local taverns, it was about glowing malls, 24-hour diners, and freeways stretching into the horizon. The rise of high-mast highway lighting. The interstate system, begun in the 1950s, was in full bloom by the 1970s. To make highways safe at night, engineers introduced high-mast lighting, tall poles, sometimes 100 feet or more, topped with clusters of lamps that illuminated entire interchanges. Driving at night became a new experience. Instead of relying solely on headlights, motorists found themselves bathed in the orange glow of high-mast systems. The interstate night was uniform, predictable, and strangely futuristic. Criticism of sodium light. Not everyone loved sodium lighting. Many people complained about the unnatural color. The orange tint distorted vision, making it difficult to distinguish true colors. Red and green traffic lights sometimes look similar under sodium glow. Astronomers also hated it. The widespread adoption of sodium lamps created light pollution, washing out the stars in urban skies. By the 1970s, observatories were already lobbying cities to shield or modify lamps to preserve visibility of the heavens. Artists and photographers, however, embraced sodium's aesthetic. Its glow became iconic in films, music videos, and street photography. In a way, the sodium haze defined the visual identity of late 20th century America. Crime, fear, and security lighting. The 1970s and 1980s were decades of rising urban crime rates. Policymakers looked to lighting as part of the solution. Brighter, more uniform sodium lamps were installed in parks, subways, and housing projects under the belief that light discouraged criminals. While studies showed mixed results, the cultural belief was strong: a well-lit street is a safe street. Cities continued investing in lighting as a tool of social control, even as critics argued that poverty and inequality could not be solved with wattage alone. The era of uniform night. By the 1980s, America's streets, highways, and suburbs had settled into a common nighttime appearance. Highways, lined with tall sodium lamps, casting amber pools across the asphalt. Cities, downtown districts glowed orange, neon signs buzzing above. Suburbs, orderly rows of sodium poles lined cul-de-sacs, shopping centers, and schools. The once varied textures of gas, arc, and incandescent light had given way to uniformity. The American night was efficient, predictable, and industrial. Part 7, The Transition Era, From Sodium Glow to LED Promise, 1990s, 2000s. A Changing Nighttime America. By the 1990s, American nights had a familiar look: highways bathed in sodium orange haze, suburbs lined with orderly amber poles, and downtowns glowing with a mixture of sodium lamps, fluorescent signage, and neon advertisements. But beneath this apparent uniformity, change was brewing. Cities faced new pressures: rising energy costs, growing concern over light pollution, and demands for better visibility in a world of 24-hour commerce and round-the-clock traffic. Street lighting was no longer just about illumination. It became a matter of economics, environment, and even identity. Light pollution enters the conversation. For most of the 20th century, Americans embraced brightness as progress. But by the late 20th century, a new debate emerged: was there such a thing as too much light? Astronomers had long complained about sodium lamps washing out the stars. By the 1990s, citizen groups began joining the fight, coining the term light pollution. Organizations like the International Dark Sky Association, founded in 1988, pushed for shielded lamps that directed light downward, reducing glare and restoring at least a hint of the night sky. Suburban residents complained about light trespass, when powerful lamps spilled into bedrooms and backyards, disturbing sleep. Critics argued that excessive lighting didn't always make streets safer, and sometimes even created glare that made driving more dangerous. The old assumption, that more light meant more safety, was being questioned. Rising energy costs in municipal budgets. At the same time, energy costs were climbing. Sodium vapor lamps were efficient compared to older technologies, but cities operated millions of them. Street lighting consumed significant portions of municipal power budgets. In the 1990s, as local governments faced tighter budgets, lighting departments were pressured to cut costs. Cities experimented with dimming systems, reduced hours, and new lamp technologies to save money. Crime, fear, and surveillance. Despite criticisms, the belief in light as a crime deterrent remained strong. In the 1990s, as urban crime dominated political debate, many cities doubled down on lighting. Parks, alleys, and subway entrances received brighter installations, often tied to new surveillance cameras. This marked a subtle shift: lighting was no longer just for navigation, it was becoming part of a larger network of urban security. The glow of a lamp meant not just visibility, but also the possibility of being watched. The first LED experiments. In the 1990s, light-emitting diode (LED) technology was still new and expensive. Most LEDs were used in electronics, tiny indicator lights on devices, not large-scale illumination. But researchers saw potential. By the early 2000s, experimental LED streetlights began appearing in pilot projects. They promised extraordinary efficiency, using a fraction of the power of sodium lamps, and lifespans of 50,000 hours or more. Even more importantly, LEDs produced white light, closer to daylight, improving color recognition for drivers and pedestrians. Early installations were uneven. Some LEDs had harsh bluish tones. Others failed prematurely. But the seeds were planted. Engineers and environmentalists alike saw LEDs as the future. The decline of neon and the rise of fluorescent signage. While sodium lamps dominated the streets, neon began fading in the 1990s. Rising maintenance costs, environmental regulations, and cheaper alternatives led many businesses to switch from neon to fluorescent and LED signage. Times Square in New York, once a neon wonderland, gradually transformed into an arena of massive fluorescent billboards and, by the 2000s, early LED displays. The aesthetic of the American night was shifting again, from glowing tubes of neon artistry to massive, digitalized spectacles. Case study: Los Angeles and energy-saving initiatives. Los Angeles, with its vast sprawl and millions of lamps, became an early leader in lighting reform. By the late 1990s, the city began experimenting with shielded fixtures to reduce glare and lower wattage systems to save costs. By the 2000s, LA was preparing for one of the largest LED retrofits in the world, a sign that the sodium era was beginning to fade. The suburban night of the 1990s, 2000s. If the 1960s, 80s suburban night was sodium orange, by the late 1990s, it was slowly becoming patchworked. Some subdivisions still glowed amber. Others experimented with metal halide lamps, which gave off a whiter, bluish light. Shopping centers and stadiums often used metal halide for brightness, while highways remained sodium orange. For many Americans, the suburban night of this era was a strange blend, the nostalgic glow of sodium mixed with the emerging sharpness of newer technologies. The 24-hour city. By the turn of the millennium, American cities were no longer just daytime hubs. Airports ran all night, Walmarts and supermarkets advertised 24-hour service, and highways never slept. Lighting was now a requirement for a 24/7 economy. The uniformity of sodium was cracking. In its place, a new palette of light, fluorescent, metal halide, early LEDs, was emerging. The stage was being set for the biggest transformation in street lighting since Edison, the LED revolution. Part 8, the LED revolution, from amber nights to white light, 2000s, 2010s. A new century, a new glow. When the 21st century began, most American streets still glowed with the familiar amber haze of high-pressure sodium, HPS. For decades, that light had defined the look of American nights. But energy crises, budget constraints, and technological advances were pushing cities to reconsider. By the mid-2000s, LED technology, once too expensive for street use, was becoming viable. Suddenly, the promise of energy savings, longer lifespans, and whiter light captured the imagination of city planners nationwide. Why LEDs? LEDs had several advantages over sodium and mercury lamps. Efficiency: they used far less power than sodium lamps, sometimes cutting energy bills in half. Longevity: LEDs could last up to 15 to 20 years, compared to 3 to 5 for sodium bulbs. Color quality: LEDs produced white light with better color rendering. Drivers could distinguish objects more clearly at night, and pedestrians felt safer in whiter, brighter environments. Smart controls. Unlike sodium lamps, LEDs could be paired with dimmers, motion sensors, and networked control systems, allowing cities to save even more energy. For mayors and engineers, LEDs seemed like a revolution waiting to happen. The Great Retrofitting. By the late 2000s, pilot projects turned into massive retrofits. Los Angeles launched one of the largest projects in 2009, replacing over 200,000 streetlights with LEDs. The city reported energy savings of over 60%, a model that inspired others. New York City began its conversion in 2013, with the ambitious goal of replacing all 250,000 streetlights by the end of the decade. The scale of the project made global headlines. Seattle, Boston, Detroit, and Houston also began large-scale conversions, each touting both economic and environmental benefits. By 2015, tens of millions of LEDs had been installed across America. The sodium glow was fading, replaced by crisp, bluish-white light. The psychological shock of white nights. Not everyone welcomed the change. For generations, Americans had grown accustomed to the amber blanket of sodium. The sudden arrival of bright, white LEDs felt alien to many. Residents complained that the lights were too harsh, too bright, too cold. Some said neighborhoods felt sterile, stripped of warmth. Others worried about light trespass, the way LEDs spilled into bedrooms and disrupted sleep. For the first time, street lighting became a subject of public protest. Community meetings were held, petitions circulated, and lawsuits filed against municipalities accused of installing overly harsh LEDs. Health concerns and blue light. Medical researchers began raising concerns about blue light emitted by early LEDs. Studies suggested that high levels of blue wavelengths could disrupt circadian rhythms, suppress melatonin, and contribute to sleep disorders. The American Medical Association, AMA, weighed in with a 2016 report warning cities about potential health risks of high-intensity LED streetlights. They recommended using LEDs with warmer color temperatures, 2700K, 3000K, instead of the harsher 4000K, 5000K models initially installed. Suddenly, a technology that had seemed like a miracle carried a shadow of controversy. The battle of aesthetics, white versus amber. The shift from sodium to LED also sparked a debate about aesthetics and identity. Supporters argued that white LEDs made cities look modern, clean, and safe. Critics lamented the loss of sodium's amber glow, which they felt gave cities a warmer, more human character. Some residents described the change as if the soul of their neighborhood had been altered overnight. A block that once glowed softly now looked stark, clinical, even unfriendly. Artists and filmmakers, too, noted the shift. The sodium glow that had defined American night photography for decades was disappearing, replaced by the sharper tones of LEDs. Smart cities and adaptive lighting. The 2010s also saw the rise of the smart city movement. LEDs were not just lamps, they were nodes in a digital network. Cities began installing adaptive lighting systems that could dim or brighten based on traffic, weather, or time of night. Some experimented with motion-activated lights, saving energy by dimming empty streets and brightening when pedestrians or cars passed. In some cases, LED streetlights were integrated with sensors for air quality, traffic monitoring, or even security cameras. Lighting was becoming part of a larger web of urban technology. Case study: Detroit's lighting crisis and rebirth. Perhaps no city illustrates the LED revolution better than Detroit. By the early 2010s, Detroit's street lighting system was collapsing. Thousands of lamps were broken or turned off, leaving neighborhoods in darkness. Crime and fear surged. In 2013, the city declared bankruptcy, and its public lighting department was dissolved. Out of the crisis came renewal. Detroit created the Public Lighting Authority and launched a massive project to install 65,000 LED streetlights. Completed in 2016, it transformed Detroit's night. Areas that had been abandoned to darkness glowed once more, and residents spoke of a restored sense of safety and dignity. Detroit's rebirth under LED light became a symbol of how street lighting could be both a practical utility and a beacon of hope. The American night transformed. By the end of the 2010s, the sodium age was rapidly fading. In its place stood a new era of white, efficient, digitally controlled LEDs. The transformation was uneven. Some small towns clung to sodium, while major cities went all in on LEDs. But the direction was clear. For the first time in more than half a century, the color of the American night was changing on a national scale. Part 9, Smart Cities, Surveillance, and the Right to Darkness, 2010s, 2020s. From illumination to infrastructure. By the 2010s, LEDs had taken root across America. The transition from sodium orange to LED white was in full swing, with millions of lamps replaced nationwide. But LEDs weren't just about light, they were about data. For the first time, streetlights could be integrated into smart city networks. A lamp was no longer just a bulb on a pole. It was a node, capable of dimming, brightening, sensing, and transmitting. Street lighting entered the digital age. Adaptive lighting. One of the most transformative innovations was adaptive lighting. Unlike sodium or mercury lamps, LEDs could be dimmed and brightened instantly. Cities began experimenting with motion sensing lights, brightening when pedestrians or cars approached, dimming when streets were empty. Time-based dimming, reducing brightness in the deep hours of the night to save energy. Weather-responsive systems, increasing intensity in fog, rain, or snow for better visibility. These innovations promised efficiency, safety, and reduced light pollution. But they also raised new questions. Who controlled the system, and could dimmed streets feel unsafe even if data said otherwise? The surveillance debate. As streetlights became networked, cities began attaching cameras, microphones, and sensors to poles. The justification was often public safety, monitoring traffic, detecting gunshots, or recording criminal activity. But privacy advocates sounded alarms. If every lamp post was a potential camera, what did that mean for civil liberties? Critics described it as the rise of the surveillance city, where the glow of light was paired with the gaze of authority. Some residents protested spylights, arguing that what was once a symbol of safety was becoming a symbol of constant monitoring. Health and sleep concerns continue. The early debates over LED blue light didn't vanish. By the 2010s, more research linked excessive nighttime exposure to artificial light with disrupted circadian rhythms, insomnia, and even increased risks of health issues like obesity and cardiovascular disease. Neighborhoods pushed back, demanding warmer-colored LEDs, 700K, 3000K, instead of harsh, bluish ones, 4000K+. Cities like Phoenix and Tucson, located near astronomical observatories, adopted strict dark sky ordinances, mandating shielded fixtures and warmer tones to preserve the night sky. The debate revealed something deeper. Street lighting was no longer just about safety. It was about human well-being. Environmental and dark sky movement. The environmental movement of the 2010s and 2020s embraced lighting as a critical issue. Ecologists pointed out that excessive lighting disrupted wildlife, migrating birds, nocturnal mammals, even sea turtles along coastal cities. Groups like the International Dark Sky Association gained influence, pushing cities to adopt shielded fixtures that cast light downward instead of into the sky. The concept of light as pollution entered mainstream urban planning. For the first time in centuries, the narrative wasn't just about conquering darkness, it was about respecting it. Case study: New York City's LED controversy. New York's massive LED retrofit in the mid-2010s became a flashpoint. Early installations used 4,000K LEDs, which residents described as harsh, cold, and hospital-like. Protests erupted across neighborhoods, with complaints about sleepless nights and ruined atmospheres. Under pressure, the city agreed to switch to warmer 3,000K LEDs, balancing efficiency with public comfort. The controversy became a case study in how technology, aesthetics, and human psychology collide in the seemingly simple matter of streetlight color. Case study: Chicago's smart lighting program. Chicago launched one of the largest smart street lighting projects in 2017, aiming to replace 270,000 lamps with LEDs connected to a wireless control network. The system allowed city officials to monitor outages in real time, dim lamps remotely, and reduce maintenance costs. For engineers, it was a triumph of efficiency. But residents raised concerns about surveillance potential. Would the smart poles also carry cameras? Would the data be used responsibly? Chicago's program highlighted both the promise and the unease of 21st century lighting. The pandemic and empty streets, 2020. The COVID-19 pandemic created a strange twist in the history of street lighting. In 2020, as lockdowns emptied downtowns, glowing streets looked surreal, rows of bright LEDs illuminating deserted sidewalks and shuttered businesses. In some cities, adaptive systems dimmed lights automatically in response to reduced traffic. For the first time in modern history, American nights were brightly lit but eerily empty. The right to darkness. By the 2020s, conversations about light had shifted dramatically. For centuries, the fight was against darkness. Light symbolized safety, progress, and civilization. But now, activists argue that darkness itself was a human right. Communities began pushing for dark zones where stars could be seen. Some suburbs demanded dimmer lights to preserve quiet nights. Cities experimented with warmer LEDs to reduce disruption. The great irony of modern lighting history is this: after centuries of striving to banish darkness, America was now struggling to bring a little of it back. The American night on the edge of change. By the early 2020s, the United States had entered a new era of street lighting. LEDs dominated, casting whiter, sharper light. Smart controls spread, making light flexible and data-driven. Surveillance concerns grew, as lamps became platforms for cameras and sensors. Health and environmental debates deepened, shifting the narrative from brightness to balance. The streetlight, once a humble oil lamp hung in Colonial Boston, had become one of the most complex symbols of modern life, at the intersection of safety, technology, freedom, and nature. Part 10: The Future of Light, Sustainability, Stars, and the Digital Night, 2020s, Beyond. The New Frontier of Illumination. As America entered the 2020s, street lighting was no longer a question of whether to light the streets, it was a question of how. With LEDs firmly established, the focus shifted to the future, making lighting smarter, cleaner, healthier, and more sustainable. For the first time since the 1600s, the story wasn't about fighting darkness. It was about balancing light and dark in a way that respected humans, nature, and the night sky. Solar-powered street lighting. One of the biggest innovations shaping the future is solar street lighting. With panels mounted on lamp poles and batteries storing energy for the night, entire streets can glow without drawing power from the grid. Advantages: reduced carbon footprint, independence from power outages, and long-term cost savings. Challenges: reliability during cloudy weather, high upfront costs, and the need for battery maintenance. Cities in sunny states like Arizona, Nevada, and California have begun experimenting with solar lighting projects. In rural America, solar lamps offer an affordable way to light streets without expensive electrical infrastructure. Smart cities and the Internet of Things, IoT. In the future, every streetlight may be more than a lamp. It may be a digital hub, connected to the Internet of Things. Possible features include traffic sensors to monitor congestion and guide self-driving cars, environmental sensors to track air quality, temperature, and pollution, emergency alerts, lights that flash during earthquakes, tornadoes, or amber alerts, public Wi-Fi broadcast from poles. Streetlights are evolving into multi-purpose urban tools, blending illumination with communication, safety, and data. Glowing roads and smart surfaces. Beyond lamps, engineers are experimenting with glow-in-the-dark road coatings that absorb sunlight during the day and release it at night. These luminescent materials could reduce the need for traditional lamps in some areas. Other concepts include embedded LED strips in roadways, providing dynamic lane markings, pedestrian crossings that light up automatically, or highways that adapt in real time to weather and traffic. The return of the stars, dark sky movement. Even as technology advances, many Americans are calling for something simpler: the return of darkness. The dark sky movement, once niche, has gone mainstream. Cities and suburbs across the U.S. now pass ordinances requiring shielded fixtures, warmer LED tones, and dimming schedules to preserve the night sky. Places like Flagstaff, Arizona, the world's first international dark sky city, have become models. There, streets are lit carefully with downward-facing lamps, allowing residents to see the Milky Way while still enjoying safe streets. The future of light may paradoxically include more darkness, a deliberate effort to restore balance between human needs and natural rhythms. Health-conscious lighting. Medical research continues to influence streetlight design. Future lamps may adjust color temperature throughout the night. Cooler white light in the early evening for safety and activity. Warmer amber light after midnight to reduce circadian disruption and improve sleep for nearby residents. Some pilot programs already use human-centric lighting, mimicking natural cycles of dusk and dawn. The future night may glow in shifting tones, more organic than static sodium or LED light. Sustainability and climate goals. As climate change dominates global policy, street lighting is being reevaluated as part of green infrastructure. Cities are setting ambitious goals to cut energy use, reduce carbon emissions, and recycle old lighting systems. By 2030, many U.S. cities aim for 100% LED or solar-based lighting, with smart grids to minimize waste. In this vision, light itself becomes a measure of sustainability. Artistic and cultural futures. Street lighting has always been more than utility, it's art. In the future, lamps may become programmable canvases, changing colors for festivals, holidays, or public art displays. Already, some cities use smart poles that glow blue during police emergencies, red for alerts, or multicolor for celebrations. Light becomes not just functional but expressive, part of the cultural identity of the city. Challenges ahead. The future of street lighting is not without obstacles. Privacy concerns: smart poles with cameras and sensors may fuel fears of surveillance. Equity issues: wealthier districts may get advanced systems while poorer neighborhoods lag behind. Over-illumination: even efficient LEDs can create waste if overused, contributing to light pollution. Cultural resistance: some people still long for the amber glow of sodium or the artistry of neon. Balancing technology, privacy, culture, and ecology will define the next chapter of America's night. The night yet to come. From Boston's whale oil lanterns to New York's neon signs, from Cleveland's arc lamps to Los Angeles's LED grids, the story of American street lighting has always been about more than light. It is about safety and freedom, commerce and culture, fear and wonder. Now, as we stand in the 21st century, the future promises both brilliance and restraint. We may see glowing solar roads, adaptive smart poles, and cities that shine in every color. Yet we may also reclaim the stars, rediscovering darkness as part of the human experience. The history of street lighting in American cities is not over. It continues tonight, with every lamp that flickers on at dusk, every neighborhood that debates its glow, and every child who looks up and wonders why the stars shine faintly above the electric sky.